chocolate? It's our only hope.
Well, hello, listeners. Now it's Friday night. And as we prepare for you the final episode of the Good American novel, we thought you might like to wait with a little recipe. I know that for many of you, next week will bring quite a lot of chocolate, and so I thought it was appropriate that we tell you the true story of Zipnog the squirrel. Now, this is all true. A few years ago, I had just started writing the Good American novel, and I had the goats, and I had the sense that there was a farmer who would go away, and I had thought about the milk and wool producing animals neighborhood society, but I didn't really know what the problem was yet. Now, it was late summer, and I left town, and I'd left a window open so my dear old cat, Pony, could come and go. When I came home, I found that when I opened the door and I walked into the entryway of the house, the first thing I saw was a family-sized jar of Nutella. And the jar had been licked completely clean from the inside, of course, and a hole was in it. So right away, I knew that something had come in, taken the Nutella off the shelf, chewed a hole in the Nutella, crawled in, and eaten all the Nutella, or perhaps reached in and eaten all the Nutella. I thought raccoon, rat. Then I noticed that on the floor there was mysterious orange crumbles and a fine brown dust everywhere. And I proceeded, and this was sort of all over the floor, lightly sprinkled, both of those things. And then I proceeded a little further into the house, and there was an empty bag of chocolate chips. And then I came a little closer, and there was an empty chocolate bar wrapper of the kind I like to have my personal chocolate that I keep in my little secret stash. And then I got to the kitchen, and in the kitchen I saw that an intruder had come in and opened all the cupboards and thrown everything on the floor. Smash, 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 smash. Oil, vinegar, dish soap, canisters of flour, canisters of salt and lentils and beans and boxes of crackers and boxes of cereal. And I started to clean up. And then as I cleaned up this terrible mess, I thought maybe it was a whole family of raccoons. As I started to clean up this horrible raccoon mess, what I began to suspect was that the animal, the intruder, hadn't eaten any cereal. There were cereal boxes and cracker boxes and things like that many of us would find very tasty. Certainly a family of raccoons would like that. No, this animal, no, didn't care. It only ate chocolate. And I found another personal chocolate wrapper. And so I came to understand that this creature had come into the house, and it was only 3 days that we were away. This creature came into the house and discovered chocolate, and it learned about chocolate, and then it sought out and found and ate all the chocolate, and then it destroyed the kitchen looking for more chocolate. Now, you may remember the mysterious orange crumbs and brown dust. Well, I discovered those under my bed. There was one other thing the creature had eaten. It had dragged a yam under the bed and shredded the yam into a fine crumble. And then it had taken a box of unsweetened baking cocoa, dragged it over, and poured the dry cocoa powder, which was the brown that was everywhere, over the yam. And I thought, now this creature has run out of all of the conventional chocolates, and now it has to make its own by adding the baking cocoa to the shredded yam for sweetness and consistency. And then I went to bed, and then the next morning I was awoken when the first light of dawn came up, and there was this terrible noise. There was a chattering and a clawing, a terrible sound of claws on glass, and I looked, and the window that had been left open was my bedroom window, and there was this great mother squirrel running in the air on the glass, screaming. And I thought, yes, she's in chocolate withdrawal. She wants me to let her in and give her more chocolate. She's discovered chocolate, and now she's been completely cut off from the supply of chocolate. Well, later that day, I sat down to do some writing on the Goat American novel, and I sat there at my desk, which was right there by my bedroom window, and I was writing about the goats and wondering what might happen to them in this story that was just beginning. And then I looked up, and there she was, sitting on the outside of the windowsill, just staring at me in this sort of defeated begging, sort of a desperate plea. Well, I had a little bar of my own chocolate. I, like the squirrel, am never without chocolate. And I broke off a little piece and I opened the window. Now, she ran away when I opened the window, but I set the chocolate down and I closed the window. Very soon she was back. She had a little square of chocolate in her hands. And she nibbled at it, staring me in the eyes the whole time. And I had known in the story that the farmer would go away and that all kinds of bad things would happen. But what I didn't know was what would happen. And I didn't know what would happen when the farmer came back. And suddenly I had a little image of the end of the story, of the farmer coming home and having a little Ferrero Rocher candy, which is a chocolate hazelnut candy I must highly recommend, and holding it out to the squirrel who had trashed the house. And the farmer saying, "Now just one a day, you understand?" And then the interesting thing was that when I looked in my mind, I looked at the squirrel eating the chocolate in my imagination. And then I looked up at the farmer, and then suddenly I saw FM. I hadn't really known anything about the farmer before, but I knew just who FM was. Now, as we all know, Zipnog has been a real agent of chaos in our story. And I want to tell you about a little chaotic event that happened just last weekend. My own son, Felix, and I were planning to make some cereal bars. And he has a child with nut allergies in his class, so he can't bring nuts to school. And he was getting very bored of the regular granola bars, the nutless granola bars that I bring him. And so we had a bunch of types of cereal, and I'd gotten some marshmallows to hold the bars together. And I'd gotten a few little things. I thought we should have pumpkin seeds. And we didn't have a clear recipe, but, I looked up the regular recipe for Rice Krispie squares. And then, we got the marshmallows and the butter going in the pan. And that's when we started to argue, as Felix and I always do when we sit down to do some baking.
"Oh, Mom, that's not enough butter. We need at least a whole stick of butter."
Yeah, so we ended up adding a whole stick of butter, which is twice as much butter as they recommend. And then we had the whole marshmallows. And then we had these dried cherries from Barb the baker, who's a real person. She gave us a bag of dried cherries. So I said, we're going to put these dried cherries in. We've got the marshmallows. We don't need any chocolate in this cereal bar. It's going to be too sweet.
"But, Mom, we need to have chocolate. It's our only hope."
Okay, half a cup then.
No, a whole cup.
Well, you have to stir the marshmallows constantly or it'll burn. And I think I was stirring constantly. So he definitely won that argument. And then we got to arguing a little bit about what kind of cereal should go in. And I said that we should have, half Rice Krispies because, we know that those hold the texture of the marshmallow cream really well. But then I said, I love Chex. So I said I wanted to put 2 cups of corn Chex in, and then just for like a little variety and interest, 1 cup of cornflakes. Not like the thin cornflakes, like a Kellogg's cornflake, but like a thicker cornflake. Often like the store brand will have that nice thicker. I like those better. And I thought, that's going to hold it better too. It's going to have more of a crunch.
Actually, you're right about that one.
So we didn't have to argue about that one. And then I took some raw pumpkin seeds that were out. They were shelled. They weren't like from a pumpkin in their shell, but they were raw green pumpkin seeds. And while we were stirring constantly, we roasted them in the oven at 350 just until they got like a beautiful nutty brown color. And then, it was getting really exciting. And everything was kind of coming together. And the marshmallows are sort of unpredictable, and we had the things measured out and we were taking turns stirring constantly. And then Felix was saying that, the toasted butter was turning the marshmallows the color of the sunset. And then I was like, okay, we've got everything. And I had the hot, burning hot, like liquid molten fiberglass of the marshmallow butter cream. It was ready to go. And the cereal was there together, and the nuts were there, and the cherries, and the chocolate chips were waiting to be added at the end. And then Felix said,
"But Mom, what about the sesame seeds?"
And I said, no, I think it would be too nutty, too seedy, but
no, I'm putting them in.
He threw them in anyway because I had the hot stuff in my hand, so he won that argument too. And then we stirred it in and we let it cool a little bit, but not a lot before we put the chocolate chips in. So the chocolate chips didn't become completely molten throughout, but they were kind of more like lumps than chips. And then we packed it in the parchment paper of our baking dish, which of course isn't going to bake. It just goes in the fridge. But then we had a spoonful each. And whenever we cook something, we always have our tester spoon and then look each other in the eye while we're eating. So we took our tester spoon and looked each other in the eye, and then our eyes opened wide. And then it was like we were swallowing the food to be the first one to get to say,
"This is what Zipnog."
These are Zipnog bars.
Yes, these are Zipnog bars.
We made Zipnog bars.
We made Zipnog bars.
So they are. And I'll put a link. You can see the pictures of the Zipnog bars. They were so good. They were just perfect. The pumpkin seeds were in there, and I wasn't planning these to be Zipnog bars, but they were seedy like a squirrel, like seeds. And of course, they were very chocolatey because Felix put in twice as much chocolate as I would have. And then I realized, there was the cereal was in the story, and also the goats, they eat a lot of pumpkins in the story. And then there's the cherry, and, of course, there's FM's cherry brandy in the story. And it was very chaotic making those cereal bars. We didn't have a clear plan, but I am pleased to say that we wrote down our recipe very clearly. So just remember, you can tweak it, but the recipe that we write down, and I can give you a link, you can go and look at the recipe and you can have a look at the picture of the beautiful, delicious Zipnog bars. They were just exactly what I would imagine Zipnog would eat. So that's the thing about a chaotic little character, a little trickster character like Zipnog is, and as we saw in the previous episode, sometimes a chaotic little character brings good things to everyone, even though I'm very annoyed with the real Zipnog still for trashing my kitchen, wherever she may be. Your final episode of the Go to America novel will be out next week. Late week, Wednesday, Thursday, or Friday next week. One of those days for sure. I promise you'll get to listen before Halloween night. Okay, see you next week.